Could the Buccaneers still pull off a blockbuster trade? That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, here with you at least 3 times a week for the time being, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. Keeping the mailbag questions going, we're going to be talking about a couple of trade scenarios as well as Todd Bowles' future and the most important ingredient to a defensive turnaround. But let's start with one of those trade questions. Insider Ted wrote in and said, if Haason Reddick doesn't show up for whatever reason, do you feel like the Bucs will then make a play to go get Trey Hendrickson to cover their butts? All right, Ted, good question, and thank you for inspiring these mailbag episodes. But here's the thing that I want to start with this particular question. I do not think that Reddick is going to no-show. He had interest from other teams. He chose to come here. He knows some of the coaches personally. He said he made it a point of watching the Bucs last year because he knew how close they were to contending. This is where he wanted to be. So I think there's a level of motivation and desire to be in Tampa. I do not think that this is a Randy Gregory situation by any means. But things happen, right? I'm human. You're human. Haason Reddick is human. We have all changed our minds about decisions that we have made throughout our lives. So let's say he does change his mind. He decides he's going to bulk and he's not going to show up. Would the Bucs be able to trade for Trey Hendrickson? I'm not going to go into whether or not they would want to. They would. It's Trey Hendrickson. But could they make it happen? Well, the Bengals have continued to botch this situation and fumble it away. Hendrickson is owed $15.8 million this year, which the Bucs can absolutely afford. They have a little over $26 million in cap space, so they could take on that contract real quick. They still have contracts like Baker and Vita that they can restructure to free up even more money. They could legitimately still cut Jamel Dean after they added 2 corners in the draft. They could restructure Antoine. They can still free up plenty more money. The sticking point in trading for Trey Hendrickson is going to be the extension. So you take a look around the league. Bosa is getting $34 million a year. Crosby's getting $35.5 million a year. Myles Garrett is getting $40 million a year. So Hendrickson is for sure going to want north of 30, probably closer to that 35 a year. And if this is where the market is, that's what he should get. He is right there in the mix with the rest of those guys. The Bucs currently have $30 million in estimated cap space for 2026 with a lot of players that are going to need contracts. I've gone over them before, but we're talking about Mike Evans, Zion McCollum. We don't have to include Haason Reddick in this hypothetical situation because this situation is created by him not wanting to play for the Bucs. So we eliminate him. Don't have to worry about that. But you still have Logan Hall, Greg Gaines, Deion Jones. Of course, you have Levante if he wants to keep playing. So there are important players that will need deals. You cannot make any of those happen. Plus, trade and extend Trey Hendrickson with $30 million in cap space. The only way to make it work is the use of void years, which we know Jason Light is perfectly fine with using, but also backloading the cap hits so that these guys would only count a couple $1 million against the cap for 2026 before you get to 2027, where they have an estimated $130 million in cap. But then you have Baker, who would be on the books with a new contract. He's got a void year in 2027 that would cost them some money. Vita Vea would be on a new contract. Hopefully Mike Evans is on a new contract. They only have 37 players under contract for 2027, with Godwin and Wirfs being the most prolific and the highest paid. So there's a lot of really difficult hurdles to get over in order to pull a trade like this off. The Bucs could certainly trade for him and then try to work out a contract later, but then you're in that difficult spot where you might have given away multiple draft picks on a rental. You can take a look at Haason Reddick. That's the situation he was in last year. That's why he didn't show up for the Jets. They made that trade and it was approved based on the promise that he was going to get an extension, and then that never came to fruition, which is what got him so upset. So if Reddick doesn't show and you only get Hendrickson for this season, can you really afford to be without your second round pick for the next 2 years, or your first rounder next year and then your second rounder the year after that? That would have to be a case where the Bengals give Hendrickson's agent permission to work out an extension with the Bucs ahead of time. Otherwise, the Bengals may not be able to get the picks that they want in exchange for a player of Hendrickson's caliber. If the Bucs are trading for a rental, that offer is going way, way down. They are not giving up premium draft picks for a guy that they're only going to have for a year, and the Bengals probably aren't going to unload him for anything less than premium draft picks, because if he's going to be a rental for somebody, he might as well be a rental for them. If the Bucs know that they have Trey locked up through, like, let's say the 2028 season, they're more inclined to give those higher draft picks in return because they know that they have him locked up for the next 4 seasons and they don't have to worry about spending premium picks on an edge rusher. So while the premise is logical and the premise is sound, where the Bucs miss out on a guy that they thought they had and they can land a player that's fed up with his current team, the amount of work that would go into making a move like this is a ton. For all we know, the Bucs are working on a scenario exactly like that, preparing to be the one to pounce once the Bengals finally give up, because they have fractured that relationship to the point that it cannot be repaired. And Hendrickson flat out wants out. He says, you either trade me or I'm not showing up. Like, that's the point that we're getting to in this Hendrickson Bengals scenario. So I think the focus would more likely be on locking up their own guys with extensions before looking to trade for Hendrickson. They might be more inclined to trade for guys like Yetur Gross-Matos or Marcus Davenport or AJ Epinesa, someone on an expiring contract that you can pay that rental price for. And then if you bring them back, they aren't making more than your quarterback is each year. Or you go back to the free agent pool and you grab a player that can be part of the rotation. And then you're probably back to where you were last season, where Yaya is your top dog, but you have a rotation of guys that hopefully produce a little bit more than what we saw out of Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. Von Miller is still out there, Jadeveon Clowney, Matt Judon, Preston Smith, Za'Darius Smith. Those are guys that can help, but they're not going to have the impact that Reddick should or would have. Now, that doesn't mean that they wouldn't be effective, but Von Miller isn't going to walk in the door and get 10 sacks at this stage of his career. If he was, he would be on a team already. None of these guys are at that level at this point. But if they can get 4 or 5 sacks and they can get some pressures and they can at least draw some of the attention away from Diaby, then that will help the pass rush situation. So I would say that you really don't have anything to worry about regarding Reddick, but that a Hendrickson trade is not out of the question right now. Just be aware that it will likely cost you a player or two from the roster next season and beyond, and that's what you should worry about depending on who those players are. The rumor mill is swirling. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. Post your job. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. You add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture, and you can double your reach to qualified candidates. It's no wonder that 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Scouting. The NFL draft is over, but the roster moves and news never stop. Host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So while we're on the subject of trades, insider Fausto wanted to ask about this one. He said, the Steelers are reportedly interested in Trey Palmer. What, if anything, would we be interested in getting back from them for him? So this rumor is coming from Zachary Smith of Around the 412. I don't know what kind of connections he has. I have never spoken with Zachary Smith. But, I don't know what connections he has, who he heard this from. But for the sake of this show and for this question, we're going to assume that this is legit. I mean, if you're going to make up a trade rumor, it probably isn't going to be about Trey Palmer. But according to Zachary, the Steelers have reached out to the Bucs about Trey Palmer. They probably should, reach out about Kyle Trask instead because they still don't have a quarterback. But they are looking to add to their receiving core after trading away George Pickens. If I'm the Steelers and Palmer is my guy, I'm waiting. I am waiting this out until training camp. Palmer is far from a lock on this Buccaneers roster. Evans, Godwin, Ibuka, McMillan, they're locks. Tez Johnson, he's probably making it based on special teams alone. Then you have Shepard, Palmer, Jarrett, and Cam. So the Steelers should really just play the long game if Palmer's the guy that they really want. When rosters get cut down, the Bucs can then call and say one of two things. One, that they'd really like to keep him. And so what would it be worth to Pittsburgh to have him? And then you might get a 6th round pick. Or you tell them that you're going to release him. He did not make your roster. And if they don't want to fight with the rest of the league for him, they better give you something. And then you might get a 7th round pick. Either way, you're not getting more than a 6th rounder. And even that is slightly optimistic. Palmer was a 6th round pick 2 years ago. He has less than 560 receiving yards in his career. He isn't a prolific return guy. He's cracking their roster. And by there, I mean, he's cracking the Steelers roster basically the same way he did in Tampa. Special teams and wide receiver 5. That's really about it. So getting back what you spent on him in terms of draft capital is really the dream. But you're most likely looking at a 7th rounder in any kind of trade. Or if you're getting a 6th, it may not be until the 2027 draft. All right. Insider Dave said, Locked On NFL talked about who will have the most receiving yards, and Mike Evans wasn't even mentioned. Disrespectful or warranted. All right. Insider Dave, appreciate you supporting Locked On NFL. It's a great show. You guys can check it out. But to answer this question, is it disrespectful or warranted? Both. I mean, I truly think both is the answer here. He should always be in those kinds of conversations because he has a floor of 1,000. He's the only one in the NFL that has that floor that's been in the league for more than 3 years. You can lock it in. You can bet your mortgage on it. Mike is getting 1,000, like period. End of discussion. That said, it's warranted from the aspect of Mike has never led the league in receiving yards in a season, ever. It wasn't until 2023 where he ever led the NFL in any major receiving statistical category in his career. And even then, he was tied with Tyreek Hill with 13 touchdowns for the most in the NFL that season. He's never led in yards. He's never led in receptions. He's led in touchdowns once. So when people don't put Mike in that conversation at this stage, it's somewhat warranted because he's not usually that guy and he hasn't been able to do it. Now, he has been close. In 2018, he was just 153 yards away from Julio Jones, who finished at the top of the league with 1,677. In 2016, he was 127 yards behind league leader T.Y. Hilton, but that really hasn't been Mike. He's the constant, the steady, the reliable, not the gaudy league-leading numbers guy. And with as many weapons as the Bucs have, it's not likely to happen this year either. Mike isn't going to go for 17 or 1,800 yards receiving. He could lead the league in touchdowns again, but he isn't going to put up the kind of numbers that it's taken over the last 4 or 5 years to lead the NFL. So if Locked On NFL, whoever it was that hosted the show that day, wants to debate me over something regarding Mike Evans, I'm totally here for it. But him not being in the conversation for leading the league in receiving yards isn't really a discussion that I'm going to be upset about, because time and time again, he hasn't been in that conversation. He's finished in the top 10 around half of the years that he's been in the league. So, Jamar Chase is going to pop off. Justin Jefferson is going to pop off. These guys, Amon-Ra St. Brown, those guys are going to get much more opportunity and much higher yards than Mike Evans is, because they don't have all of the other options around them that Mike does, which makes what Mike does that much more impressive, right? He's getting 1,000 every single year when he had Godwin and Antonio Brown and Rob Gronkowski around him. He had Godwin and Julio around him. He has Godwin and now McMillan. Now you add Emeka Ibuka into the mix, and you have yet another threat that's going to take away some of his targets, going to take away some of his receptions, going to take away some of his yards. It's just going to happen. So the fact that he is still on this run where he's getting 1,000 yards each and every year, and he has the opportunity to break Jerry Rice's all-time NFL record for consecutive 1,000-yard seasons, is mind-boggling. It shows how truly elite he is. Because those other guys, you put Jamar Chase on a team with this many other legit weapons, he's not putting up 1,800 yards like he did last year. It's just not going to happen. Same with Amon-Ra. You swap him with Mike Evans, he's not putting up the kind of numbers that he gets in Detroit, because they have Jamison Williams, but okay, that's kind of like the Mike and Chris years when it was just the two of them. So you can still make that happen. But then when you have two more receivers that would be wide receiver 2 on a lot of teams in the NFL, and I'm talking about both McMillan and Ibuka, these guys would be legit wide receiver 2s on most NFL teams this year. And he's still putting up 1,000 yards. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. But it's going to come down to the fact that he's not going to have the opportunity to be able to put up 1,800 plus yards that it's going to take when Jamar Chase has to get that for the Bengals to be competitive. Justin Jefferson has to get that. Amon-Ra St. Brown has to get that. Because although Detroit's running game is great, Jamison Williams, he's up and down. He's all over the place. You don't know what you're getting out of him. Amon-Ra is the one constant that they have among the wide receivers. So, yeah, no, I don't take it as disrespect. I think he should be mentioned just because of his track record, but I don't put him in any kind of serious conversation for being able to lead the league in receiving yards. Bowles' future and the recipe for the defense. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Wrapping things up here on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. And we're going to jump to Twitter for the last two mailbag questions, starting with our good buddy, everydayer Mad Dog at MaddogBucks76 on Twitter. He wrote in to ask, if the Buccaneers do not make the playoffs, do you think Todd Bowles will be fired, or do you think his part in a Super Bowl win and winning the division has given him the benefit of the doubt? Thanks, Mad Dog. Mad Dog, thank you, buddy. Love hearing from you. Mad Dog and I talk quite a bit through the internets. But this question, it's situational for sure. So, I mean, is this a season where the team just played like crap and didn't live up to expectations? Or is this a season where Tristan goes down to injury and then that leads to Baker going down because he's getting beaten to death and he gets injured? And then the run game collapses because there was no threat in the pass game because you've lost the best left tackle in the NFL and your quarterback. So now Bucky and Rashad have no room to operate because Kyle Trask isn't moving the ball anywhere. And then the defense gets destroyed by injury to the point that they're signing Ryan Neal off the street and they're trading to bring Joe Tryon-Shoyinka back. Like that kind of scenario. And I realize that is like worst case scenario, but that kind of scenario, Todd Bowles gets a pass. He's not getting canned if half the team is in the hospital or in rehab and physical therapy for their injuries. But if they're mostly healthy this season and they can't seem to win games, they can't close out in the fourth quarter, they lose a lot of these last second games and they wind up missing the playoffs, I could absolutely see Bowles getting fired. That's the nature of the game, right? If you don't win as a coach, you lose your job. Unless Baker is the one that goes down, and then you have to find a way to navigate, his injury and other injuries to try to get the team to the playoffs. Like the quarterback is the one exception to that rule, right? Where they withstood a lot of injuries last year and still managed to find their way to the playoffs. You lose your quarterback, pretty much, all but one or two teams in the league, you lose your quarterback for any kind of extended period of time, or they go down to a season-ending injury, that's you get a pass, right? Because that's not the season that you built your roster for, and nobody is building their roster around the backup quarterback. Now, has Todd built up enough goodwill to potentially get a pass on one down year? Maybe. Again, it really depends on why that year was down. Is it one of those up and down seasons and the ball just doesn't bounce their way, so they finish 9-8 and then they miss out on the playoffs because the Falcons or the Panthers won 10 games? Then I could see Bowles returning after a season like that. Is it a repeat of 2008 when the Bucs were in the driver's seat at 9-3 and then they lost their last 4 games of the season? They missed the playoffs and then John Gruden got fired. Yeah, a collapse like that, that's going to lose Todd Bowles his job. So I wouldn't say that a losing record or missing the postseason is a guaranteed death sentence to Todd Bowles' job as the head coach in Tampa, but a winning record isn't a guarantee that he keeps his job either. It all boils down to how all of those things transpired. So I realize that's not exactly the answer you were looking for, but that's the God's honest truth. That is a very situational question. If the Bucs miss the playoffs, send me the question again. Send it to me again. We can review the season, see why they ended up doing what they did, and then I will let you know my feelings on whether or not I think Todd Bowles will keep his job in 2026 or not. Last one here from Twitter. It's from Evan Timberlake at Surf Renegade, and he said, who is more important to a defensive turnaround in 2025? Haason Reddick to come off the edge like he did with the Eagles, getting not only sacks, but also forcing fumbles, or Antoine Winfield Jr. returning to his all-pro form from 2023? Great question, Evan. I love this. Look, Antoine in 2023 was one of the most impressive season-long performances I have seen in the last 2 decades. He got his money, he got his accolades, he got his flowers, but then last year he wasn't the same. Injury played a huge part in that. He was not healthy all year long. He got hurt in the first week of the season, and he was out and he was in and he was out and he was in, but he was never 100% again the rest of the year. Hopefully he's back to form, puts up some unforgettable performances again. But the answer to your question is Haason Reddick, and here's why. The Bucs did not have that outside pass rush threat last year. Diaby did some really good things, but he wasn't closing out plays. Pressures can be great, but sacks are always better, and the Bucs were not getting them from their edge rushers. Having Reddick come in and play the way that he did for the Eagles changes the entire landscape of the defense. It gives them a threat on either side of the quarterback, in addition to what Vita and Kancey are bringing as down linemen. Then it takes the pressure off the secondary. So many times last season, the guys in the secondary who were second or third stringers half the time because of all the injuries, they were left on islands. That's not how this defense is built. That's not how they're going to be able to make plays. With Todd Bowles, it starts up front with the pressure. And he can do a lot of different things to create pressure from a lot of different looks with a lot of different players. But it starts with your natural pass rush from your down linemen and your edge rushers. So if you have Reddick out there getting double-digit sacks or getting the quarterback off on his timing or forcing him to scramble, what he thinks is scrambling out of trouble and he's actually scrambling into more trouble, that's going to result in more takeaways and more punts. At that point, that's when the secondary, Zion, Dean, Morrison, Parrish, those guys are going to have more opportunities to jump routes and take the ball away because the quarterback has had his timing completely thrown off by the pressure coming in from the edges. That's when Antoine and Tyke can sit back and basically play center field and intercept passes that have way too much air under them because the quarterback was under so much duress and so much pressure that he's just trying to get rid of it, and he's throwing up a wounded duck. And then Antoine and Tyke can just sit back there, can of corn, boom, it's going the other way. So the great thing about this question, Evan, and why I like it so much is because you don't actually have to choose between the two. I can promise you this. If Haason Reddick shows up playing like he did for the Eagles, then you're going to end up seeing the Antoine from 2023, barring any injury, just by default, because he's going to be able to be so much more versatile because it's not going to fall solely on him. Hopefully, Tyke is the safety that we all hope he is. Hopefully, he's as good at safety as he was at nickel corner last year because Jordan Whitehead wasn't it. But now, if you're getting pass rush from your natural pass rush, you can start with the exotic blitzes again. You can start sending Antoine into the box, and you can set him up for success the way that you did in 2023. It is so, so important that the Bucs have that edge rush working, and they are getting legit pressure from Reddick and Diaby, as well as the rest of the rotation. But those two are the primary focus because they're the starters. They cannot have another season where their leading sacker is their nose tackle. No disrespect to Vita, but that's not what he's there for. It's great to have him get sacks, but you need your leading sacker to be the guys coming off the edge. That's going to do it for this episode. We will be back tomorrow with Evan to talk OTAs. There's going to be plenty of media availability. We'll talk to Evan about the players and coaches and speak to the media, as well as what he's seeing out there at OTAs. Until then, please check out everything going on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. We're on TikTok now. If you're a TikToker, follow at Locked On Bucs. Let's grow that following over there and hopefully get the show in front of some more people that have never heard of it before. That's a lot of fun. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube with the notifications turned on so you know every time a new episode drops, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. And become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. If you don't want to be an insider, but you want to support the show, leave a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help put the podcast in front of other people and helps them find it and discover how much fun we have on this show. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.